Hi, I am Philip Gould. I am here with Margot Hasha. Together we have done a book called Bridging the Mississippi, spans across the Father Waters. We are at the John James Audubon Bridge near St. Francisville. It's one of the most beautiful bridges on the river, and we wanted to read a couple passages from the book. So I'm going first. I'm going to talk about the story of how this book came to be. The vintage bridge we were approaching seemed grand and fitting for a Mississippi River crossing, yet the span was actually narrow, barely wide enough for two vehicles meeting from opposite directions. As we carefully drove across the old bridge on that very cold night, we could see piercing beams of truck lights ricocheting off the span's metal superstructure and into the misty frozen air. On this remote bridge near Cairo, Illinois, where the Mississippi and Ohio rivers merge, this compelling scene was something I had not witnessed in my lifetime of travel. I was headed to Paducah, Kentucky with Robert Dafford, a fellow artist and friend from Lafayette, Louisiana. After a long day's drive, we reached the Mississippi River, crossing at Cairo well after sundown. While crossing the bridge, I debated with myself about whether to ask Robert to stop the car so I could set up the tripod and photograph what I was seeing. I said nothing, though, as the moment passed. As we drove on, I could see opportunity receding in the rearview mirror. It was easy to rationalize my decision at the time, exhausted from traveling all day, I thought it best to hold my tongue and continue. It's a busy bridge. Yet my choice gnawed at me for weeks. In time, however, my regret morphed into a seed of an idea. If that one bridge in Cairo was so intriguing, what about the other spans over the river? Why not document crossings up and down the entire length of the Father Waters? I imagine photographs of visually compelling bridges in large cities, small towns, rural farmland. Surely each would have its own distinctive identity. Simultaneously, and to my amusement, I was often thinking about an old Jimmy Rogers song, Miss the Mississippi and You, a heartfelt tune covered by numerous country music icons, including Merle Haggard and Emmylou Harris. The song tells of America's great river far from the big city lights, whose shores offer refuge to a weary soul and a comforting embrace of the singer's beloved. It didn't take much of a mental leap to replace Miss in the song title with bridge, and after changing bridge to bridging for grammatical clarity, I had a workable book title, Bridging the Mississippi, as well as a potential romantic sub-theme for the project. Also thought of the countless times I have crossed the Mississippi River Bridge since moving to Louisiana in 1974. When traveling to Lafayette, Baton Rouge, or New Orleans, I crossed the old bridges whenever possible. Children once called these older spans Huey Longs, a reference to the plaques hanging over the entrances that state, built under the administration of Governor Huey Long. It was during his brief tenure as governor and U.S. Senator from 1928 to 1935 that Long modernized Louisiana's transportation grid, constructing thousands of miles of roads and over 100 bridges throughout the state. With ideas for the project taking shape, I began my research. I knew precious little about the river bridges outside of Louisiana, so I had tried to learn as much as possible about the crossings. John Donlan, a friend and colleague, heard about the project and sent me an intriguing email in which he wrote, "I have long admired bridges as improbable objects and unifying devices, and have visited them all over from the great Limpopo to the sluggish Father of Waters. When I went to St. Louis, I hoofed over to look at the Eads Bridge. Crowds were at the nearby arch. However, a little knot of guys was at the foot of the bridge, young Malaysian engineer geeks visiting America and doing a pilgrimage to sites from their textbooks. Over the next few years, I made 3 extended trips upriver, summer, fall, and winter, plus numerous ventures closer to home. My approach was simple. Focus on the spans with historic significance as well as the bridges that are architecturally intriguing or simply dramatic, if not beautiful. In my photography, I'm concentrated on 3 factors pertaining to the bridges: architecture, landscape, and humanity. Photographing the humanity aspect was often most rewarding, as the photographic subjects would suddenly appear, creating numerous serendipitous moments. I was seeing people in situations I had never anticipated when planning the book. In most instances, each photo's relevance to the greater story was immediately clear. In organizing the book, I had to decide how to sequence the bridges, whether to go upstream or down. After much consideration, I chose to head upriver in my portrayal. From a Louisiana vantage point, I knew the river best at its lower latitudes. Heading upstream to photograph would be my voyage of discovery, something akin to an explorer's quest to find the river's source. Finally, after 3 years photographing for the project, I have come to appreciate the importance of Mississippi River bridges. Practically, they provide essential national links for transportation and commerce. Figuratively, they are stitches in America's fabric, connecting regions as well as local communities. What also became abundantly clear is that the bridges across the Mississippi River and elsewhere often provide the aesthetic framing of life-affirming settings, such as parks, river walks, and levee trails in towns and cities alike. Places where people could gather and engage, as the Jimmy Rogers says, with that old river shore. Thank you. Here's Margot.
Hi, I'm Margot Hasha. The headwaters of the Mississippi River is at Lake Itasca, Minnesota. And our last essay of the book is about the Mississippi River headwaters there. I'd like to read to you from that essay now. During the winter months, Lake Itasca in north-central Minnesota is quiet and still. Here at the headwaters of the Mississippi River, the temperature is 10 degrees Fahrenheit on a clear February day. Snow blankets the trees and shrubs, and the lake is a vast frozen plain. On the northern side of Lake Itasca, a small, steady stream flows from the lake and over a wall of ice-covered boulders to begin its long journey to the Gulf of Mexico. Inscribed on a nearby plaque is the message, quote, "Here, 1,475 feet above the ocean, the mighty Mississippi begins to flow in its winding way, 2,552 miles, to the Gulf of Mexico." In contrast, warm summers at Lake Itasca entice as many as 500,000 vacationers from across the nation. They swim, hike, camp, and wade into the headwaters with their dogs and their children. They pose for souvenir photos to prove to folks back home that this clear, shallow stream is the Mississippi River. 100 feet downstream is the first river crossing, a 30-foot log. Farther north, as the stream widens as it flows through the park, wooden footbridges transport visitors from one bank to another. Itasca State Park is a 50-square-mile preserve of forests and lakes. From here, the river flows farther north, gradually widening as it travels to its northernmost point in the town of Bemidji at Lake Bemidji. The Mississippi then turns south towards St. Cloud, finally making its way to the twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. Declaring Lake Itasca the official Mississippi River headwaters was a complicated process. During the early 19th century, many people agreed that the river began somewhere in northern Minnesota within a vast network of small lakes formed by glacial drift thousands of years ago. A few explorers were determined to search for the river's true source. Hundreds of years ago, natives of the Ojibwe tribe called the source the Spirit Lake. Later, French explorers shortened the name to Lac La Biche, or Elk Lake. In 1833, Henry Schoolcraft, a noted geographer and ethnologist, explored the area with the help of local natives. He aimed to refute a claim made in 1820 by General Lewis Cass that a smaller pond upstream from Lac La Biche was the river's true source. Schoolcraft traveled downriver to Lac La Biche, where he declared the true source of the river. To reinforce his assertion, Schoolcraft renamed the lake using parts of two Latin words, veritas, truth, and caput, head, to form a tasca, or true head. In 1889, Jacob Brower, a land surveyor commissioned by the Minnesota Historical Society, confirmed Schoolcraft's proclamation. On April 20th, 1891, the Minnesota legislature voted to set aside Itasca State Park for the public. The lawmakers also wished to protect the old-growth pine forests within the park from powerful logging interests. The bill passed by one vote, making Itasca the first state park in Minnesota and the second in the United States. Even so, the Mississippi River headwaters at Itasca State Park are not solely nature's creation. In 1939, the Civilian Conservation Corps drained the surrounding swamp, dug a clear channel from the lake, and installed a series of boulders at the site, creating a dramatic setting that annually entices hundreds of thousands of curious visitors to the source of the mightiest river in the United States.